Hello, my name's Steve and you are listening to the Go Footballing podcast. This is the show that talks about grassroots football, whether you're a football coach, a player, parent, referee, maybe you just got a love for the game, but sit tight, you are in the right place. So on the lineup this week, we've got drills versus practices and small-sided games. What are the benefits of both? How do they fit into your sessions? We're going to be talking about that a little bit later on. Before we get started, thank you everyone for engaging. Your emails are very welcomed, and you can always email into us at gofootballpod@gmail.com. So, drills versus practices, let's get into it. So I decided to do a nice one this week, really, just talking about drills and practices, the differences between them and where they might come from. I mean, if you look on a lot of social media sites, or if you're ever looking for anything to do with football in a football session, especially for youth age groups, especially for grassroots football, you'll always see the word drills always come up in everything as well. It's always find a drill, it is games and drills, it's always something and drills with football. And I think that's what we see a lot, and I think that's just the standard terminology. But I actually call all my sessions practices. Now, it doesn't mean that I don't do drills in them, but the main differences for me is what are we going to get out of them, and why do we get out of them? I think with my sessions, this is how I plan my sessions. I'm sure a lot of coaches do the same too, is that there's the 3 L's that I just don't coach with, and I do everything I can to avoid them, really. And I know this is going to get a bit of backlash from some coaches and some players maybe, although some players will probably like the fact that I do this as well. But the 3 L's for me is laps. I do not get my players to run laps for things. Okay, they're not learning anything other than just getting fitter by running around. We could do that in games. We could do that in practices. So we can do that there. Lines. Now, I try as hard as I possibly can to make less line drills. So, they're the ones, especially when you see them at a grassroots game. You'll have the coach stood in front of the goal. Player will play to it, they'll play back, and all the kids, they're all lined up. So there might be 10 kids in a line waiting for their turn. Try not to do anything that's in lines like that. Doesn't mean that I don't do anything in lines, because obviously it's essential for some practices, especially at some age groups, that there's rest involved, and it depends on what the intensity is of those practices. And the last one that I do is lectures. I know that you're probably thinking he goes on and on his podcast all the time. I do a little bit. I'm on everyone's side for that. I am known for talking a lot, but lectures too. I think that what I try to do in my sessions is I try to make it so that every time that we have to go in for a coaching point, it's 30, 60 seconds. We're doing it for this. This is why we do it. And a lot of the time it is just going in to just correct things. So that's what I don't do in sessions. No laps, no lines, no lectures. The 3 L's for me. Do you follow that too, or something similar to that? Let me know. So let's talk about then drills first, or where they sort of like came from. Well, firstly, they're not in the army as well, but obviously it's repetition of what we're wanting to do. To develop skills at anything, it takes approximately 10,000 hours of practice in football skills to be able to master anything on a skills level. So if we look at how we want to develop players, we look at technique at one side of the line, and then we look at skills over there. Let's think of it like a pen or something like that. So at the end of the pen, we've got the little clicky bits on there as well. So that's just the technique side of it as well. So we need to be able to do that. We need the repetition of it just clicking backwards and forwards. Whereas at the other end of the pen as well, that's the writing pen. That's the one that's going to do the skill work, and that's the one that's going to be doing the writing. So we need to see where our practices and where our drills or where our practices fit on there and what we're trying to achieve with them. So if we look at like technique, for example, and we do have a need for doing drills, as a lot of people call them, what we generally find is that they are referring to technique, and they are more technique. That allows us to perform set actions like passing and dribbling and shooting. So I definitely think there's a way to be able to use them. I still agree, though, with the 3 L's, which is keep them out of lines, keep children out of lines, keep players out of lines, keeps them more engaged. And also, just before we do get any further into this, how many people start with a game at the start of their session? I start with it at every session that I do, always start off with a game. A couple of things. Everyone turns up on time because everyone wants to play a game. It stops after a short amount of time. Anyone asking when's the game, because they've already played some game time too. So 10 minutes, and also make it free play sometimes. So free play, I let them just play, and we're not talking, not shouting, not telling them, not giving instructions, because then they can make their own decisions up. Then we can go into practices. Then we can go back into games later on too. And a lot of the time, I will go for technique-based skills, something that's maybe unopposed, not got much interference, and then move into practices where there's a lot more. But I generally do everything I can to keep them out there. But there is still a set amount of skills. If you look at some of the practices that you get from doing these so-called drills as well, where it's repetition and repetition, technically will get a lot better. And that's not just always doing the same thing. I mean, there was some interesting things that I've read regarding Ronaldo and Messi, where they learnt their skills. Obviously, they're both elite players, so quite out of the grassroots game. But there was a distinct difference between how one was trained compared to the other. Apparently, Ronaldo was doing a lot more technique-based practices. So he was just taking things like free kicks, shots, over and over and over again, and just didn't stop doing them. You probably saw the same sort of thing from Beckham as well. Taking free kicks, it's just repetition, just repetition, just repetition. Whereas Messi actually got really good with his dribbling skills and his other technical skills from playing small-sided games over and over and over again. Just decision making over and over again, sort of like playing in the little 3v3s all the way through, and everything just being a small-sided game. So technique is important, and we do need to use that. But what we have found is, and I'm a bit of a stats kind of guy too, so I do look at a lot of those, that, some studies showed that 70% of technical drills improve performance in training, but only 30% of the skills that you're learning technically can be used in a real match scenario. That sort of shows how much do we need to practice in that range. We're looking to get to 10,000 hours so we can master the football practice and the technique that we're looking for, but if only 30% of it is going to be used in an actual real game scenario, how much do we need to use in our sessions? Let's look at the other side of that, small-sided games. Now, I love small-sided games for lots of reasons. One is everyone's doing something cool at the same time. You can break your groups off into smaller groups, so we can play a 1v1s or 2v2s, 3v3s, 2v3s, 1v3, 4v3. You can do all of these different things. And we can also practice a number of different items that we want to be able to do. Maybe we're looking at delay. So maybe we're looking at a 3v2, 2 defenders, 3 attackers. We're looking at delay of how we can be able to get those skills across. And what we're really looking for is, in these small-sided games, is the skills element. So we've looked at the technical element from the drills, but looking at skills, that is where we're able to use the skills, using the techniques that we learn in drills. How can we use those in games to make decisions and make quicker decisions? Also, by playing the small-sided games and actually using practices as opposed to using just drills, it will help a lot of players in multiple positions, and it'll improve their skill set of across all of their footballing skills that they would need, whether that is going to be defending, because we can always be able to do that. And we also have to realise that football isn't fair, and not everything sits up to you perfectly. It's great that we could do a drill and just take shots constantly from a still ball, unopposed, no one in front of you, or dribbling from cone to cone, or round a post or something like that. That's great, but it's not opposed, so it's not game realistic, and we lose that game element out of there too. There's also some more research done that you got 20% of higher rate of succeeding as a footballer if all you are doing is playing small-sided games, which is why a lot of academies and a lot of other teams now, and a lot of coaches, they're introducing more and more small-sided games, to help with development and help players get the skills that they need and be able to use the techniques that they can use as an actual skill base in an actual game. So with small-sided games, football is never fair, and I think that with a lot of small-sided games, you can make a lot of game-realistic scenarios that will really help put players under pressure so that they can very quickly get the skills that they actually need. And they're developing the technique at the same time. I think that you need to use both of them at the same time. However, small-sided games based on practices of 3v3s or 5v5s, something along those, you increase your player involvement by around 60% as opposed to static drills that you would normally get. I think that from games too, by playing games, I think that the decision making increases. I've read some reports where it's up to 35%. Because they're more game realistic rather than isolated drills. So again, I think that games are more essential and better for more people to do, because I think that we've got 60% more game involvement and also 35% more game like decision making practices rather than isolated drills and static drills. That's only going to be good for development. I suppose the next sort of stats that we've got on those for coaches though to be aware of is just the physical fitness side of it. I think that sometimes people always say, "Oh, they're not game fit," which means that basically they're just not ready in the environment to play a game, as opposed to just running. We've probably all met some kids before that they seem that they can just run and run and run and run and run, but as soon as they go into a game where there's going to be interval training in there as well, short sprints, and everything is an interval around box to box areas. And it's a very, very different type of fitness. But small sided games do boost aerobic fitness by about 25% over standard drills, especially because of the amount of time that you could stand waiting for them again. So, I think there's a lot of pros here for the small sided games and practices. I always call my sessions practices that we're doing. I'd say that also playing games as opposed to standard practices, probably supported by some of the top clubs too. I remember not that long ago, England were playing, and in the background they were playing small sided games in the back. There's no real need for them to be doing drills and drill practices. But I do think that for younger age groups, I think it can definitely help. But what we're doing is we're not encouraging them to move freely and think about their moving. If we've just got things like cones or markers or places that they need to go to. I think the small sided games also need to be directional. They need to be thought of what we're trying to achieve from them, as opposed to just play 3-on-3. We need to be looking at different things with there, like what are we trying to achieve from the game? That will make a big difference on how effective a practice is, as opposed to a drill where we're maybe thinking, look, we probably need to work on finishing here as well. We probably need to work on body positioning. Are we not even facing the goal when we're shooting? Are we just trying to kick it first time from anywhere? And there's always going to be those kind of conversations we need to have regarding, when we're looking at drills versus practice and small-sided games. So again, just looking at the stats that I mentioned earlier, 70-30 kind of split, as I think is a good split in an actual session. And I think that's where we kind of need to be around that figure of having 70% of the decision-making, game-based practices that we have, over 30% of maybe technical. Because all we're looking at really when we're looking at technical practices is how can we use that in an actual game? If we're just looking at a 1-2, what we're going to use that in a game? Yeah, absolutely, we'll use a 1-2 in a game. It's a core move. Everyone wants to see a good 1-2, especially if there's a goal at the end of it. But at the same time, if it's always unopposed, is that a technique that we can use in a skilled-based environment where there's interference and players around? So here's something you could do for one of those things. So if we are looking at maybe like a 1-2 and that's a core skill, maybe you can use first part of your session completely unopposed. The 1-2, this is the pass that we're going to do, or a core move. It could be any other core move. It could be diagonal run, straight pass, diagonal run. It could be any of those. But then we can put that into a small-sided game where you can only score, or we've got end zones where you need to use that core move first. That way, we're using the technical side of what we're looking at, and we're getting players to become more technically capable of the skills that they'll need. But we're also putting it into game situations where they've got interference, they've got players around them, and they've got to think about those decisions of when they're going to make the right pass, how are they going to be able to do it? Even though we've given them the technique before that, how can they use it as an actual skill? I suppose the main takeout that I've really got on drills, especially the static ones, is when people are just waiting to play. Like, I don't mind having practices where people have got rest time in there, especially if we're working on, or you're working on something like recovery runs, and maybe you want to attack into a recovery run, into a defender, into a sprint, and then there's a rest period after that, as players are rotating around on the same practice. Maybe we've got a practice that's set up like that. But, I think with the small-sided games, you're averaging about 5 times more touches compared to like an 11-a-side game when you're playing 3v3s, for example. If we're taking 5 times as many touches and it's, you're getting 10 touches in a 11-a-side game, or you're getting 50 in a 3v3 game. So, it obviously makes sense to be able to do that. I just think that as coaches and as coaching staff, and for players too, is just to understand what we're trying to achieve from this. Is it a small-sided game where we're looking at practicing? Is it one where we're breaking lines? Is it one where we're looking at playing wide? Is it a small-sided game when we're looking at delay? Is it one of a game that we're playing where we're looking at patience? Is it one that we're looking at any of the core fundamental skills that we need to become better footballers? I think overall, though, as coaches, even for parents and players, anyone that is watching the game, sessions need to be fun and engaging. If we can engage with a lot of players, they'll fall in love with the game. They'll want to play forever. It'll make our lives easier. It means that we don't have to do any recruitment because players will be wanting to come to you. because they'll be starting with games, they'll be playing lots of games, they'll have lots of touches of the ball, they'll understand that they're not going to be stood in lines. They're going to know that they're not having lectures given to them. They're not going to be running laps constantly, and they can become really good footballers. Even if you only have that 1 hour a week or that magical 1 hour, which a lot of teams get per week, where we can split that right down into 15 minutes worth of technical practice, 25 minutes worth of small-sided games, a little bit of coaching in between and some intervention, and then obviously some gameplay at the end where they're all making decisions. I think that's a great kind of set for sessions. So maybe you could just email in and just let me know what your favourite practice is, or alternatively, what your favourite small-sided game is. So my favourite small-sided game, this is one that I love playing, is I like how the pitch split in half. It's just appropriate for how many players. Sometimes I play this with under 10, sometimes I play with under 14s too, but we'll have one side, an equal side of the game. Ball gets played in, so we may be playing a 3v3 on this half of the pitch. On the other side of the pitch, it's a 2v2 with a goal, and maybe with a goalkeeper too. On the side of the 3v3, we'll set a set amount of passes up. Player then has to transfer, and we have to transition the ball into an attacking phase, which will make the 2v2. Whichever team has the ball, they're the attacking team. So, let's say we've got a Reds and Blues playing 3v3. Reds have got the ball, make a series of passes, able to play across the halfway line to another player of the same colour. They're going to attack that goal. As soon as that happens, what we're going to do is we're going to then play another ball in to those 3v3, and they've got to keep hold of that ball and win the ball off each other until the other two on the other half have actually scored. All the ball's going to have to play. So it changes what the dynamic is. At first, it is, can we play and can we transition quickly? Then it turns into can we keep hold of the ball and can we keep hold of it under pressure until our attackers have either scored or the ball's gone out of play and we can transition that ball. And every time we just bring a new ball into that 3v3, and every time that the ball is lost with the strikers at the other end of the pitch when we've transitioned, they are going to be waiting for the ball. So what they'll need to do is think about space. We'll need to think about how we can keep hold of the ball. We get so much out of that because both teams are attacking, both teams are defending. They're both looking at transition. We're both looking at pressing. It's a lot of high energy, and it's also very repetitive. So, and we get lots of different things out of it because we have that phase of, can we transition the ball quickly? And then we also have the phase of, now we need to keep hold of the ball whilst they're still playing their game on their half of the pitch. If you do want to see that practice, I'll drop a little link in the bio as well. You can go and watch that one too. But just email in, let me know what your favourite practices are and what your favourite drills are. And you can do that, again, just email into us. That is gofootballpod@gmail.com. So this week there is no trivia. I'm not doing any trivia this week. However, I do want to give a little bit of a mention now. I think sometimes it's always nice. Look, we're a grassroots community. I think it's really important that we all work together. It doesn't matter where we are, even if we've got different opinions and views. I'm sure not everyone shares my views and opinions, especially, if you go back and listen to episode 7 on the 3v3 and the changes that the FA are making. Not everyone's going to agree with those. However, I think that I like to follow where the facts go, where the stats go, and I follow the evidence and the information. As long as we can utilise it correctly as coaches, that's what I do. However, little mention that I do want to put out there, and if you are listening, thank you very much. It does mean a lot. I do put a bit of effort into these sessions, but I'm also very new to podcasting. So if you do want to let me know of anything that you think could improve or make things better, that would be great. I did get a little bit of a reach out message though from another podcast, and it's another Grassroots football podcast too. So, if you can, then go over and check out Grassroots podcast. You can get them on YouTube, and when they spell roots, it's the ROUTES. But yeah, just go and check those guys out too. I've listened to a couple of their podcasts already. They think they're funnier than me. They're probably not. There's just 2 of them at the same time. But you never know. Might even do a podcast with them and get them on the show. So yeah, look, just sharing the love of Grassroots football. Do go and check them out as well. And listen, I'll be back next week. Same sort of time. Trying to release them on Saturdays about 6 o'clock so that you've got them in the car ready to go to the game the next day on a Sunday morning, where it's probably going to be light drizzle or rain again, and we've seen the weather. It's always kind of the same. So until then, thank you very much for listening, and I will see you next week.